Good morning and welcome to this podcast. This is about history, but it's also about 2024. And my question is, what is England? What is the England that we see today in 2024? Where does it come from? Where do the English come from? And those are very, very important questions. As I'm talking, we are now at the end of June. On the 4th of July, we will have probably one of the most important general elections in this country's recent history. And it is a significant time. I want to just look at what has shaped England and the English, what makes England and the English what it is. And I'm going to share a few thoughts with you. Do feel free to leave your own thoughts. And, I share them just because it's something that is precious to me. On my mother's side, our antecedents, our history goes back 1,000 years, over 1,000 years in these islands. And on my father's side, they settled in England in the 1850s. So they've been here for 160 odd years on my father's side, and on my mother's side, hundreds and hundreds of years, well over 1,000 years. I think my mother's family were resident in these islands. So England, what is it? Well, over the last 30 years, we've seen, particularly since 1997, we've added over 9 million people to the British population. There's been an unprecedented desire to come and live in the islands of Britain, both Britain and Ireland, I should say. And those tensions, those difficulties, some would say they're positives and some would call them strongly negative. However, that debate aside, what was England? Where did it come from? And what, I would argue, what makes it special? Before World War II, Britain was actually a homogeneous nation. It had few immigrants came to our shores. That was partly due to logistics, because it was actually very difficult. People would have to come by ship, and it was quite easy, relatively easy, to control borders. Few immigrants came to our shores. The British tended to go overseas. And by 1897, I've mentioned 1997, when there was a great explosion under the premiership of Tony Blair of immigration. But by 1897, 100 years before that, Britain ruled the waves through the Royal Navy, through mercantile trade. The British Empire was a mercantile, a merchant empire, rather than a military empire. So in 1897, Britain did actually rule the waves. It had the largest navy in the whole world, and almost 25%, or around 25% of the world's population lived under British rule. The British Empire was the empire on which the sun would never set. And of course, we know that not to be true. The empire was a force, I would argue, and you may disagree with me, was a force for good and bad at times. And I would refer you to the work of Professor Nigel Biggar, that's Biggar, Professor Nigel Biggar, and his work, extensive work that he's done on the British Empire, because I don't accept the anti-colonial messages that are continually peddled by the left. I think those can be challenged. I think, yes, certainly the British Empire did have much good, and it also had some bad elements as well. And that's an argument for another time. What I would say is that English exceptionalism preceded American exceptionalism. That's where we see a nation as a light on the hill, if you like, that we are called to a special role, if you like, in the world. And I would argue that there is a sense of English exceptionalism, that we are called to be a nation, a light on the hill. And England has played a pivotal role in the affairs of nations. So what made England England? What was special about it? Well, these small islands were a series of kingdoms in the past, and going back not really further than, it's a long time ago, than the Roman occupation. England was occupied by Rome, and around 410 AD, the Roman troops left England, or Roman Britain, Romano Britain, and they were called back into the mainland empire, and here we were left without rule or control. That's the traditional narrative. Arthurian legend, the legend of King Arthur, is based on a degree of truth. It's based on probably the legend of King Arthur is stories, true myths, if you like, I would argue true stories of a local powerful king who maintained the rule of law and Roman order in England, or in Britain, or Romano Britain at that time. And he also imposed or encouraged Christian belief and Christian civilization at that time. But he maintained that Roman order. Trade was carried on. We see from Tintagel in the west that there was continual trade with the Mediterranean in these so-called Dark Ages. And of course, we don't have a lot of written records around the 400s, 500s, 600s. Paganism was strong, and we've seen that, from the Druid beliefs and so on right through. And there were threats later in the medieval period, past the 400s, 500s, 600s. Obviously, the pagan Vikings and the Danes and so on were a threat. But just going back to this Arthurian figure, he imposed a degree of order on probably a significant part of England as we know it today. Paganism itself was not strong. Christianity had taken hold in the Roman occupation of these lands in Romano Britain, and it had entrenched itself as a belief, as a true belief amongst the population of Romano Britain. And paganism was effectively a flawed religion. It promised much, but its promises were empty. It left its followers devoid of a true and certain hope. England was invaded from 410, and the forts around England, the forts of the Saxon Shore, I think they were called, but there was a wave of Germanic invasions, invading the indigenous people, Celts, Romano Britons, if you like. These were the Angles, the Germanic tribes of the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons. England, by its inclination and by race, is a Germanic and Celtic mix. So you have these Germanic tribes coming in from the east in ships, quite warlike, settling, and then becoming part, if you like, of the local population. The idea that the Angles and the Jutes and Saxons came in by force, yes, they did, but also there is quite strong evidence that they came in by force to a degree, not in the numbers that we perhaps once thought, but we can see evidence from the eastern coast of England that they did come in and come in in fairly substantial numbers. And we can see in the northeast of England and in certain parts of England, we can see evidence of that. But England became a mix of this Germanic culture and the indigenous, if you like, Celtic Romano-Britons were still here. You know, they hadn't gone anywhere. And there's indications that they intermarried and that they were basically, you know, quite a lot of the indigenous Celtic Britons were in fact pushed out to the west. And in the Welsh language, it talks about England as, in Welsh, as the lost lands. And we have evidence, for example, Sutton Hoo, which was excavated in 1939, a veritable treasure trove and an insight into Anglo-Saxon England. It evidences a strong network of Anglo-Saxon skilled seafarers, military men and kings that followed a military and strong Germanic feudal type of arrangement. But it wasn't the Dark Ages. Sutton Hoo and current evidence points to skilled jewelers, if you like, or skilled artisans, blacksmiths and so on. It's not the Dark Ages as perhaps we were taught 50, 60 odd years ago. There is still very strong archaeological evidence for continued trade with the Mediterranean, and that again going back to those Arthurian times. I want to jump forward into perhaps talk about why England is England. Somebody who resonates down the years for me personally, and I can only talk personally, is a man who has in English history, he has been called has been given the suffix Alfred the Great. I don't think, is there another king or queen? You know, maybe there's an argument for Elizabeth II to be called Elizabeth the Great, but you know, I think that, is there any other king that has been called the Great? Alfred the Great. He was a pivotal and influential shaper of England. He fought against the Great Heathen Army, the Viking onslaught that poured into England at that time, and that was a very real threat to England. Now, I can't go into that. That's going to take me far too long to go into that. But what I would say, England is England because partly Alfred the Great was so great. And England is shaped today by legal, spiritual, military, the military might of the Saxon kingdom of Wessex. And then England became England as we know it today through Alfred the Great, perhaps the first navy of England, setting down laws, setting down Christian teaching. Alfred himself travelled twice to Rome as a young man and then later as an adult. Alfred encouraged learning. He encouraged faith, the Christian faith. He encouraged law. He set borders. He was a great military man. The England that we know today is mainly down, not wholly, but primarily, I would argue, in quite a large percentage, the percentages one could argue with, because of Alfred the Great. And he's gone down in English folklore as this great king. But the myth is true myth. The stories are true stories. He did defeat the Great Heathen Army along with his Anglo-Saxon colleagues and local kings. He did set up a series of defences throughout England. He did coordinate the army. He did coordinate an early form of navy for England. And I would argue that the piratical and explorational element of England is down to these Germanic invasions of the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. I would argue that the English character is taciturn, it's innovative, it's faith orientated, it's fundamentally shaped by Christianity. And there's that amazing sort of juxtaposition of Romano-British Christianity, which Christianity probably came to, we know it came to Britain in the Romano-British period, but I would venture a guess that it came very, very early, almost within although Paul the Apostle didn't travel, as far as we know, to England, to Roman Britain. It came very, very early. And there was that sort of symbiosis, if you like, of faith and law and order, if you like. It was a faith-orientated nation. Alfred unified, solidified, and set the nation onto its track as it is today. England is England because of Alfred the Great. He was a great king. We are, as England, an Anglo-Saxon nation. Yes, the Celts, the Celtic nations who lived here previously, and I think there is truth, and I think archaeologists would probably argue that there was truth that the Celtic nations, the Romano-British, were pushed to the western edges of the land. But I just want to share that with you. Do feel free to just throw in your comments. I'll try and make sure that I leave it open for comments. If you like this video podcast, do subscribe, do give me a thumbs up, and thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. And God bless you, and may you be blessed as I have been blessed over these years. Goodbye and good morning to you. Have a great day.